This is ICAStnews.com, live and direct from the United Nations in New York City. This is bubbling under and bubbling over. What's bubbling over now is the unprecedented United Nations action to authorize a multinational force led initially by cruise missile controls of the United States and Navy-based assets and Air Force B-2 bombers that are trying to secure the airspace over Libya. What's remarkable is that people are saying something you almost never hear about the Security Council or the United Nations. They acted too fast. They moved with deliberate speed. A surprise move to get the Security Council to back a no-fly and very active military program over Libya came as a result of a confluence of agitation by the French and the British, a diplomatic shift in the United States position, support by the Arab League, and the decision by China, by Russia, not to object, not to interfere, in other words, to abstain, and at the last minute, some very important tactical maneuvering vis-a-vis South Africa on the part of the United States' increasingly assertive Ambassador Susan Rice. With an air war now being waged against the ground forces and the potential air force of Libya, the first phase of this operation that has many contradictions, insecurities, unsolved dilemmas, and could provide a perplexing dilemma for the Security Council itself is underway. The key to this seems to be that three women, Samantha Powers, an advocate inside the Obama administration, Susan Rice, an African expert in the Clinton administration, now the ambassador to the United Nations, and someone who is an Africa expert and has on her conscience the too slow, delayed action that the United Nations took in Rwanda, and the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, who was First Lady at the time that the United States did little, too late about Rwanda, and her husband, the president, Bill Clinton, said it was one of the grievous mistakes of his administration, acted to prevent harm against groups of civilians trying to push Gaddafi, Colonel Gaddafi, out of power in Libya. The resolution of the Security Council calls for a prevention of overarching brutalitarianism on the part of Gaddafi. It does not call for his ouster. This leaves a whole host of perplexing problems. What if, even with control over airspace, what if even control over tanks that could run over, brutalize, and kill those opposed to his regime, what if Gaddafi hangs on to power? Or what if Gaddafi hands off his power to little Gaddafis? Will this interference in a civil war continue? Will the military force of Great Britain, France, and the United States be able to eliminate deposits of mustard gas? What will the Germans do? The Germans who did not vote in favor of this resolution, who sat on their hands like the Russians, like the Chinese. What does this do to their chances to say, we want to become a permanent member of the Security Council? What if Libya splits in half? The western half around Tripoli, still under Gaddafi's control. The eastern half now in the hands of rebels whose political goals, other than down with Gaddafi, we don't understand. What if they become independent? How long will troops stay in the air, hovering over this very polarized land. Moreover, what is going to be the political outcome for people like Susan Rice, whose actions, vocal agitation, and persuasive voice probably is responsible for pushing the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, to adopt a more aggressive procedure? Susan Rice changed the strategy. The ambassador changed the tactics. She masterfully got the Russians and the Chinese not to do something, not to block the action. The Russians and the Chinese, sensitive to invasions, sensitive to Western military might, are still talking against the action. In a way, this is too bad. It would have been quite interesting to see a joint Navy Air Force coalition of Russians and Americans acting in consort and together to support a change in the North African world order. What will come out of this amazing resolution by the Security Council leaves a good deal to be debated and to be seen. Generally, we understand through history that interference in civil wars prolongs the conflicts, does not shorten the conflicts. A conflict of man and nature is going on in Japan. As a result of the tsunami, more than the earthquake, there are nuclear meltdowns in the offing. People are again, as they did at the time of Chernobyl, learning about words like plutonium, cesium, strontium-90. The first indications that far from the scenes of the nuclear devastation that is enveloping northeast Japan, that the food supply is being compromised, are now coming in. What the long-term effects of the health fallout from this nuclear incident are, we will continue to watch for a long time. Chernobyl taught people that milk products, local vegetables, and the health of children in close proximity all were threatened by nuclear incidents. This is a case where the UN again is going back to its old mode. The International Atomic Agency, based out of Geneva, needed to be invited to send their representatives to begin an investigation. They were slow to provide information. Their website was not reassuring. It contained no secure, instantly believable factual material. And at a time when the authorities who are running the Japanese nuclear plants are not exactly forthcoming with the truth, it would have been nice had the UN, through the Atomic Agency, been able to catch up with the 21st century and realize that news goes on 24/7, around the clock, in streaming video, and on the web. Here's a case where the UN acted in its normal 20th century slow bureaucratic mode. If there is a need to protect which is now being used as the raison d'etre of action in Libya, should there not be a need to protect what people need to know, a need to protect against international atomic incidents? Fallout goes everywhere. Should not the International Atomic Agency be more aggressive in getting on any case without being forced to wait for an invitation to please come investigate? Isn't it time they got with the 21st century? And in the 21st century, we have this week something new, something sponsored by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, a plague upon the world, the plague of slavery, particularly the plague of slavery between Africa and the Western Hemisphere, the Atlantic crossing, the Middle Passage, The acts of people selling other people as chattels and possessions, people who became the fundamental building blocks of the riches that were realized in the New World. Slavery is being commemorated on the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. All week, the United Nations will be talking about the consequences of slavery, a phenomenon which, if not so overtly, still exists in some parts of the world. Ban Ki-moon said this: "We must acknowledge the great lapse in moral judgment that allowed the transatlantic slave trade to happen. We must urge present and future generations to avoid repeating history. We must acknowledge the contributions that enslaved Africans made to civilization. And the countries that prospered from the slave trade must examine the origins of present-day social inequity and work to unravel mistrust between communities. Above all, even as we mourn the atrocities committed against the countless victims, we take heart from the courage of the slaves who rose up to overcome the systems which oppressed them." Ban Ki-moon, a man of peace, calling for people to rise up. Ban Ki-moon also commissioned a 3-minute video for viewers of the events to be commemorated on the 25th of March, and it features drum beats. The slogan is "Breaking the silence, beating the drum." We invite you to watch a small portion of this now. And beating the drum for contemporary relevance, the slave trade issue is not something entirely of the past. Out of Eastern Europe, out of Africa, into North America, specifically into the United States, 50,000 women a year are brought as sexual slaves. This form of slavery continues to be a plague upon the conscience of the United States and America. What went on for so many years on ships with sails goes on with airplanes with wings these days. Women are brought into sexual slavery into one of the more modern countries in the world, the United States. Sexual slavery goes on within the very shadows of the big United Nations buildings here on the East River in New York. We will continue to watch this story as we watch other things that are bubbling under and bubbling over from our perch over the East River in New York City at the United Nations at ICAST News. For ICASTnews.com, live and direct from the United Nations, for Bubbling Under and Bubbling Over, I'm Jonathan Sanders.